Massive nerfs to OP champs like Samira, Maokai, and Jax headline 13.4. We've got another huge patch on our hands with 20 champions being adjusted, along with a bunch of item and rune changes as well. With the help of our challenger players and utilizing the most recent data, we are set to bring you guys the 13.4 tier list. But before we get into it, be sure to check out Skillcapped if you want to truly get better at League of Legends. We're the only service that offers a money-back guarantee if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. We do this because our service really does work, and if it doesn't work for you, you shouldn't pay. Learn more at the end of this video or click the link in the description below. Melee supports are being thrown another bone for 13.4 with the health regen of Relic Shield and Steel Shoulder Guards being increased from 25 to 50%. We are already seeing champs like Nautilus, Blitz, and Rakan absolutely dominating the solo queue meta, so expect them to be extremely powerful in 13.4. Not only are melee supports being buffed, but enchanters, mage, and ADC supports are being nerfed. Mana regen on Spell Thieves and Spectral Sickle are being lowered from 50 to 25%. The charge generation timer is going from 10 to 12 seconds. On top of this, the fully upgraded Shard of True Ice will have its mana regen lowered from 115 to 100%. In the grand scheme of things, all these changes are targeted towards putting a halt to the ADC support meta we are seeing in pro play. For solo queue specifically, we are definitely going to see melee supports dominating in 13.4, as many ranged supports will be taking a step back. Kill experience is being nerfed across the board for 13.4, and comeback experience is being targeted as well. The jungle meta as of recent has been heavily focused around spam ganking bot lane and efficient pathing not being as important. These changes will be a step in the right direction to combat that and reward good junglers. In previous patches, you could be doing so much more than the enemy jungler, but then they'd get off one good gank, pick up a ton of comeback XP, and all of a sudden they're right back in the game. These kind of coin flip plays that could propel you back into games in previous patches won't be as rewarding in 13.4. What do you guys think about comeback XP anyways? Do you think it should be completely removed from the game? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Not only is experience being nerfed this patch, but the snowball power of Treasure Hunter is being hit as well. Gold per stack is going from 70 to 50, and the total gold you can acquire drops from 550 to 450 gold. Treasure Hunter has been such a staple rune on so many different champions, so instead of autopilot taking it every game, you'll now have to think a bit more if it's worth it based on your matchup. For example, someone like Gangplank can run Domination or Resolve for secondaries, so in matchups where the early game is more volatile, running Resolve with Bone Plating will be better value than Treasure Hunter. Demonic Embrace will now have a damage cap against monsters of 40 damage per tick. All of the top tier junglers from previous patches have been Demonic Embrace abusers, so we should be seeing a nice shakeup to the jungle meta for 13.4. A few more changes to the jungle as base kill heal is going from 25 to 30. Base Gromp health is down from 2,200 to 2,050. Rift Herald will no longer have a soft reset state. Companion AP ratio is going from 15 to 12%. Another change that negatively affects the top tier AP junglers of previous patches like Maokai, Udyr, and Elise. Riot tried to sneak a Doran shield change into the patch, calling it an adjustment when it's really just a flat out nerf. Base regen is going from 6 per 5 seconds to 4 per 5 seconds, a nerf to many melee top laners for 13.4 and a buff to ranged. There are also a decent amount of melee mids who like to take Doran's shield, so mages will see a small spike in power this patch too. Jace has already been on the rise in previous patches, so watch out for him to take over in 13.4, especially in high elo. A couple of top laners will be buffed this patch, starting with Cho'Gath. Cho's Q mana cost is going from 60 to 50. Q damage is up from 80 scaling to 300 to 80 scaling to 320. W mana cost is lowered from 70 scaling to 110 to 70 scaling to 90. Armor growth is up from 4.7 to 5. In all honesty, these are likely more significant buffs to mid lane Cho than they are for top lane. What will likely happen in 13.4 is a Q max first now becomes higher priority than E. Q max is actually winning more than E prior to these buffs, so especially in lanes where you can't actually auto attack a ton, Q over E will be the way to go. In regards to Cho'Gath's power level, we don't see these changes being enough to significantly bolster his strength in meta, so we'll only be shifting him one tier, going from B to A. W max Malphite is going to be looking extremely good as we transition to 13.4. W cooldown is being lowered by 2 seconds at all ranks. W armor ratio is up from 10 to 15%, while W cone armor ratio is going from 15 to 20%. These buffs will really help to solidify Malphite as that hard counter to auto-reliant melee top laners. When playing into champs like Jax, Fiora, or Aurelia, prioritizing W max over Q will be great value. In matchups where you can't reliably auto-attack though, like Gangplank or Jace, putting at least 3 points into Q will still be better than W max. All in all, Malphite will be a phenomenal counter pick top for 13.4 and be placed in our top lane A tier. Riven buffs are not something we expected, as she's going to be one of the best carry tops for 13.4. Passive damage is being changed so that it scales linearly with each level instead of receiving a boost at level 6, 9, 12, 15, and 18. This will make Riven's all-in power pre-6 a little stronger now. Passive stacks will also show under Riven's health bar, but only you will be able to see them, not your opponents. Riven's passive will now deal damage to towers at 50% effectiveness. Riven isn't really known for her tower taking power, but this change will add another layer to Riven's solo carry potential. For Riven's tier list placement, she will be locking down an S tier spot. Jax is being absolutely hammered with the nerf bat this patch, so let's take a look at the changes. Base health is going from 685 to 665. EAP ratio is down from 100 to 70%. E dodges will now increase total damage instead of base damage. E max damage is being changed from 119 scaling to 350 to 110 scaling to 350. AP ratio is up from 100 to 140%, while the max health damage is going from 4 to 8%. R on hit damage is down from 80 to 60 at rank 1. R armor received is going from 25 scaling to 65 to 15 scaling to 65. R magic resist is nerfed as well, going from 15 scaling to 39 to 9 scaling to 39. So the biggest takeaways from these nerfs is that Jax's early to mid game is getting hit extremely hard. Super late game Jax will still be as good as before, but reaching that point will be more difficult with how much weaker his early game has become. Overall, quite heavy nerfs to Jax, and as a result, we will be shifting him from OP tier down to A tier for 13.4. Having a look at the top lane tier list, we have Gangplank, Darius, and Shen as the most impactful carries of the patch. The big change to top lane for 13.4 that will affect the most amount of champions is the nerf to Doran's shield. These early game dominant top laners like Jace, Quinn, Pantheon, Irelia, and Olaf will all become indirectly stronger. Gangplank is going to be absolutely disgusting as well, since less early sustain means that constant Q poke is going to hurt much harder. If you really want to play a sleeper top laner in 13.4, then Cassiopeia is an excellent option. Super broken into meta champs like Darius, Fiora, and Gangplank. The best low elo top laners to climb the fastest are Yorick, Garen, and Nasus. Fiora, Darius, and Gangplank are who should be banned the most. The lone jungler buff for 13.4 is going to be Viego, as Riot will be giving his offensive builds more power. Passive damage will now be able to crit. R ratio is going from 3 up to 5% missing health per 100 bonus AD. It will be really interesting to track Viego builds this patch, as back in the day, an Essence Reaver with Shield Bow core was an optimal build. Something like Essence Reaver, Shield Bow, and Infinity Edge could see a comeback due to the passive buff. It's hard to judge how impactful these buffs will be, so Viego will remain in the B tier for now, and we'll adjust him accordingly for mid-patch if crit builds do become significantly stronger. Maokai is being hit with a plethora of nerfs this patch, but he's being thrown a small compensation buff as well, with his Q max health damage going from 2 scaling to 3% to 2 scaling to 4%. Everything else is a nerf though, as E cooldown is increased from 10 to 14 seconds. This is such a massive nerf to Maokai's objective control. E damage is being reduced by 5 at all ranks. EAP ratio is being lowered from 0.35 to 0.25, while the health ratio is going from 0.9 to 1%. Overall, a massive hit to AP Maokai. However, tank Maokai won't be negatively affected all that much. The demonic into Liandry's build is going to become much weaker now, and we are likely to see Radiant Virtue prioritized way more. We wouldn't be surprised if full tank Mao just becomes the most optimal way to play him now. For Maokai's tier list placement, he will be shifted from OP to A tier. Elise will have a decent chunk of her early game power sliced for 13.4, with melee Q base damage going from 70 scaling to 210 to 60 scaling to 180. Spiderling base damage drops at the earlier ranks, going from 10 scaling to 25 to 8 scaling to 26. Not as harsh of nerfs compared to Maokai, but enough to remove Elise from her OP tier standing, as we'll be moving her into S. Amumu has been such an underrated jungler in previous patches, so much so that he's even been seeing play in the pro scene. A few nerfs are lined up for Amumu, with his health growth and armor growth both being reduced. W max health damage is going down as well, from 1 scaling to 2% to 1 scaling to 1.6%. When you take into account the demonic embrace nerfs too, Amumu will be on the decline for 13.4 and moving from S into A tier. The demonic abuser being hit the least significantly this patch is Udyr. Health growth and base armor are both being reduced. Q on hit ratio is going from 30 to 25%. R slow is down from 25 scaling to 40% to 20 scaling to 35%. Demonic nerf will likely affect Udyr more than these direct nerfs, but even then, we don't see him losing as much power as the likes of Maokai and Amumu. As a result, we will be shifting Udyr down just one tier, going from OP into S. Jarvan has shot up in power quite drastically over the past patch, so Riot will be toning him down a little. W cooldown is going from 8 to 9 seconds. W AD ratio is lowered from 80 to 70%. Keep in mind, the Jarvan buffs from 13.3 still outweigh these nerfs, as he will remain in a much stronger spot than a few patches back. We'll be keeping Jarvan in the S tier as one of the better jungle carries. For the jungle tier list, it's Fiddlesticks, Evelynn, and Echo as the most optimal carries. With kill experience being lowered, it's going to help these level 6 spiking junglers out a little that can't be as proactive throughout the early game. At the same time though, with comeback experience being reduced, if you can play a good early game jungler and set the enemy behind, you're going to be on better footing for 13.4. It's more so just that bad junglers will actually be punished a little more if they don't jungle efficiently. Top 3 low elo junglers of the patch are Fiddle, Mordekaiser, and Rammus. Evelynn, Echo, and Jarvan are recommended jungle bans. Some really nice buffs are headed Veigar's way this patch, with his Q range being increased from 950 to 1050. W range is going up as well from 900 to 950. One of Veigar's main weaknesses has always been that he's a shorter ranged mage, so these buffs do a great job at addressing that. It's difficult to say how impactful buffs like these will be, as we don't see range increase changes all too often, so we'll keep Veigar in the B tier for now and adjust him accordingly down the road if the buffs end up being significant. Ahri has actually been one of the weaker performing mids in previous patches, so Riot will be issuing a couple buffs. Base health is up by 20, and base armor is going from 18 to 21. Our cooldown is being lowered by 10 seconds at all ranks. Nothing meta shifting here, but we do expect the changes to be enough to solidify Ahri as a good A tier mid. Some follow-up buffs to Orianna are on the way, as Riot missed the mark with her buffs from a few patches back. Base armor is going from 17 up to 20. W mana cost is being lowered by 10 at all ranks. Riot's taking a very precautionary approach in buffing Ahri, as they likely don't want her to become too OP for pro play again. That being said, these buffs are nowhere near what she needs to move up into a top tier position and will remain in our mid lane B tier for now. Anivia has been dominating mid lane the past few patches, so some nerfs are finally on the way. Health growth is going from 96 to 92, while her armor growth is down from 5.2 to 4.9. Scaling is not Anivia's weakness. It's her pre-2 items when she's the most vulnerable, so the fact Riot isn't hitting Anivia's early game much at all is a pretty big win. Nerfs will put Anivia more in line with the other S-tier mid laners, but we don't expect Anivia to be falling out of meta as a result of the changes. Riot has these Azir changes listed as nerfs, but it will really depend on the elo as to how impactful they will be. Mana pool level 1 is being blown up, going from 480 down to 380. W recharge timer is increased from 9 scaling to 6 seconds to 10 scaling to 6 seconds. E damage is up from 60 scaling to 180 to 60 scaling to 220. EAP ratio is up as well from 40 to 55%. R damage is being increased from 175 scaling to 475 to 200 scaling to 600. Our AP ratio is up from 60 to 75%. The mana pool nerf is without a doubt very significant and will hurt Azir's laning power. At the same time though, Azir's laning is not where he shines. It's the mid to late game where you make your mark with Azir. So the fact his scaling has been buffed is quite big. For solo queue specifically, where the early game is not as important as in pro play, we expect Azir to become a little stronger. That mana pool nerf for pro play though may be too significant and easy to exploit by good players. B tier is where Azir will be placed for 13.4. Just one OP tier mid for this patch, as Annie is an incredibly strong carry after her 13.3 buffs. These more volatile melee mid laners like Akali, Kassadin, Yasuo, and Yone will all be a little bit more exploitable in 13.4 due to the Doran's shield nerfs. Champions who can threaten early game kills really well, like Cassiopeia, Tristana, Pantheon, Rumble, LeBlanc, and Talon, will all become indirectly stronger due to those Doran's changes. More commonly seen in the top lane, but a really good cheese mid lane pick to counter many of those melee mids is Renekton, and he'll be loving the Doran's nerfs. Mid lane Renekton with a blade into Prowler's build has incredible one-shot power and can make a champ like Yasuo or Yone completely useless. Best low elo mids of the patch are Swain, Malzahar, and Annie. Annie, Anivia, and Aurelion Sol are who we have highest on the ban list. Aphelios has been completely garbage for such a long time, and to be honest, that probably won't change with this buff. Passive attack speed is going from 7.5 scaling to 45% to 9 scaling to 54%. Champ is going to need a lot more than that to lift him from the depths of C tier, so we won't be moving Aphelios up in 13.4. Just one other ADC change for this patch, as Samira is on the chopping block. Passive movement speed is being lowered from 3.5% per stack to 1 scaling to 4% per stack. A pretty hefty nerf to Samira's early skirmish power. Our lifesteal effectiveness is being reduced, going from 66.7% to 50%. Passive nerf is the big one and will drastically reduce Samira's mobility throughout the early to mid game. We expect the nerf to be quite significant, and as a result, we'll be shifting Samira from OP into S. The queen of bot lane and the only OP ADC of the patch is Xayah. Samira nerfed means there is no other ADC on the same level as Xayah, especially with Rakan becoming stronger as well. Doran's shield nerfs don't really affect bot lane too much, as very few champions run the the item, but if you are someone who ran D-Shield on ADC, Doran's Blade will be far superior now. With a lot of melee supports coming back into meta, and now that Samira has been nerfed, don't be sleeping on Neela. Neela paired up with Nautilus, Rakan, Blitzcrank, or Thresh can do some serious work. With Treasure Hunter nerfed this patch, it will give more indirect power to the Boots and Biscuit's secondary page. Xayah, for example, has had near identical win rates running Domination and Inspiration secondary in previous patches, but now that Treasure is nerfed, Inspiration will be more enticing. Our top 3 low elo ADCs of the patch are Tristana, Misfortune, and Jhin. Draven, Xayah, and Samira are who you should prioritize banning the most. Another round of Alistar buffs as Riot will be increasing his AP ratios once again. Q AP ratio is going from 70 to 80%. WAP ratio is up from 90 to 100%. Passive heal is going from 6 to 7%. In the grand scheme of things, these buffs don't really mean anything for support Alistar. If you want to play Alistar AP, it's obviously a buff, but that's not the most optimal way to play him. We will be locking the cow down in the A tier despite the buffs. With nerfs to Spectral Sickle, Riot will be providing Senna with some compensation buffs. Attack speed ratio is going from 0.3 to 0.4. Our cooldown is being reduced by 20 seconds at all ranks. Our damage is going from 250 scaling to 500 to 250 scaling to 550. Our bonus AD ratio is going up as well from 100 to 115%. All in all, some pretty light buffs, and Senna should be coming out of 13.4 pretty neutral when you factor in the nerfs to Sickle. A tier is where Senna will remain on the tier list. W Max Thresh is being nerfed for 13.4 as Q Max will now become way more valuable. Q damage is going from 100 scaling to 280 to 100 scaling to 300. AP ratio on Q is up from 80 to 90%, which will make a Shurelya's Rush even more powerful. Q cooldown is being lowered by 2 seconds at max rank, so there's good reason to max Q out first now. Not only is Q buffed at max rank, but W is being nerfed. W shield is going from 50 scaling to 150 to 50 scaling to 130. W cooldown is changed from 22 scaling to 16 seconds to 21 scaling to 17 seconds. Lastly, E damage is up from 75 scaling to 215 to 75 scaling to 235. EAP ratio is going from 60 to 70%. Key takeaways here are that Q Max now reigns supreme, while Shurelya's should be prioritized over Locket in games where you are ahead early on. We don't see these changes being enough to propel Thresh into the OP tier, but he'll be a really good S tier option now. The most powerful support carries at 13.4 include Nautilus, Annie, Blitzcrank, and Rakan. We'll be sure to keep a close eye on how the starting item changes affect the role throughout the patch. Melee supports are going to be the most optimal without a doubt, and Rakan is leading the way in that regard. We have adjusted Ashe and Lux down to A tier as they were very fringe S tier picks in previous patches, and the item nerfs will push them down a little. Although Amumu is being hit with some direct nerfs, the buffs to Relic Shield will help to alleviate that blow, so even though we move Jungle Amumu into A tier, support Amumu will only be dropping into S. Best low elo supports of the patch are Brand, Heimerdinger, and Zyra. Rakan, Nautilus, and Annie are 3 of the highest value support bans. Alright guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more about Skillcapped. So, we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee, and think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's like a gym membership guaranteeing you'll get ripped. Your local gym would go bust if they offered that, right? Not us. We've offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium league guides on the internet. We add over 20 videos a week, with over 1,600 guides curated into over 100 courses no one can compare. We've also sent Challenger players into Elo Hell 714 times and counting, where they commentate how to carry live. They also respond to all questions asked. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you are serious about improving. So that's going to wrap everything up for our latest look at the solo queue meta. Thank you guys for watching, good luck on the Rift, and we'll see you in the next one.